Hello and welcome to the OhSewGecko channel. My name is Lisa and today we're sewing the Fundamental Tote from Joleelee Creations. This video is part of the sewing marathon from the Marathon Society, so make sure you check out all the other videos in this series and also the videos that have been filmed before. Just a quick thank you to Leslie from Joleelee Creations for allowing myself and all the other sewers to sew your pattern today. This is the Fundamental Tote from Joleelee Creations. As you can see, it's quite a nice size. It's got a really lovely angular feel to it. Inside, I've done a zipper pocket and it comes with the zipper facing included in the pattern. There's also the option to do a slip pocket as well if you'd like to, but for today I haven't done that. I have deviated from the pattern a little. I thought it would be fun to include a facing on the top. So this facing here isn't part of the original pattern, and I've also left it as a raw edge on the top because I thought that would be quite fun to do in cork. But I'll take you through all the steps to add a facing to the top of your Fundamental Tote. The other thing that I've changed is the hardware size. This pattern calls for 3/4 inch hardware and I didn't have enough in my stash to make the 3/4 inch, so I've actually used a 1 inch hardware. And I've also created my own strap tabs, although there are options for different strap tabs included in the pattern for you. This is a really quick sew. It comes together really easily and it's lots of fun to make. So let's start sewing our Fundamental Tote. So starting off, I've got my two outer fabrics. It's quite bright here today, sorry, it's super sunny, it's streaming in the windows. I hope you can see okay. So two outer fabrics, both of these are in a really lovely deep purple cork. Then I've got my two lining fabrics, which are in this gorgeous Tula pink with the lemurs on. I've been saving this one, so I'm quite happy with that. I've got I'll put these over to one side, two pieces for the zip pocket that's going inside. This is the zipper overlay for the zip pocket. So the pattern calls for 3/4 inch hardware. Now I don't have 3/4 inch, I've got an inch. These particular ones, along with the zipper pull, actually came from the Gecko Box Winter. So I've got some of these that I can use. The pattern, because it uses the 3/4 inch hardware, I've created my own strap tabs. If you want to do that, all you need to do is make sure that this here across the center is 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters, and then you can create yours in whatever shape you'd like. There are instructions inside for using specific strap tabs from Saya Swag, or alternatively there's the instructions to do the hidden strap connectors. But for today I'm going to use these ones. As well as that, you are going to need to make two straps for your purse. These are 28 inches long. Again, because I'm using the wider hardware, these are 1 inch wide straps, not the 3/4 inch, which the instructions are for in the pattern. If you want to make the 1 inch like me, you'll need them 28 inches long by 4 inches wide to be able to fold them into the center and then fold again. 28 inches is about 70 centimeters, and then that's by 10 centimeters wide again, so as you can fold them into the center and then fold again. As well as all of that, you'll need a ruler, mine's in centimeters or inches is fine, some thread snips, a marking tool, I'm using this one which is chalk, rotary cutter because I'm using cork, some scissors, some little clips, and again because I'm using cork, I've got a lighter here. So to start with, because I'm not folding in a seam allowance, I've actually cut 1/2 inch off the original pattern piece. So the outers and the lining are already 1/2 inch shorter on the top. With the outers, that's all we need to do. So I'm going to put those over to one side. So for the lining, so we've already cut our 1/2 inch off the top. We're going to measure down 1.5 centimeters from the top, and we're going to cut that top piece off. That will leave us with enough to be able to stitch on a seam allowance. With the facing, I wanted the facing to be 1 inch high, but I do need a seam allowance on the bottom. So again, I'm going to measure down from the top edge 1 inch, and then I'm going to add 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter onto the bottom of that. So right now, this facing here is 3.5 centimeters or 1 3/8 of an inch. Before we do anything else in the pattern, we need to sew these together. So taking my lining right side up and my facing, this is the longer edge, this is the shorter. I'm going to put it right side down, lining up centrally across the top, and I'm going to stitch across here with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitching really well beginning and end, and then I'm going to stitch again just ever so slightly the other side in the seam allowance to do 2 rows of stitching just to make sure that my stitches don't pull. I'm going to do that on both pieces. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this up, pushing this seam allowance behind the lining fabric. Okay, so I'm going to push this up, fold it down. There we are. Okay, just turn that over so you can see. There we go. So the seam allowance is now behind the lining fabric, and now I'm going to top stitch across this top edge using a 3.5mm stitch length, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from this edge here. I'm going to do that on both pieces. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make some marks on our outers and lining fabrics. So I'm going to start with this one. I'm doing the inside zipper pocket, so I'm going to use this lining fabric for that. With the other lining fabric, if you're doing the inside slip pocket, you will need to make marks on this one as well. But since I'm not doing that inside zip pocket, I'm going to put this piece over to one side. I will be making marks on the outer as well, but for now, let's put those over to one side too. And we'll start with this lining fabric. So this is the one that you want to use for that has the inside zip pocket on. So we'll take my ruler, mine's in centimeters, take my ruler and I'm going to measure down 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the top edge, and I'm drawing a line all the way across. Right, so bringing back the outer panels, I'm going to first of all find the midpoint. Oh, fluff. Now we can't cut into this because we're leaving a raw edge, so I'm just going to find the midpoint there. I'm going to use a chalk marker to mark that point. I'm using a different chalk marker for this because if I use a chalk marker like this, the one with the metal wheel, it will actually mark the cork. I have done it before, it doesn't come off, it's a nightmare. So if you've got one of these, don't use it on cork, find yourself a different marker to use. So I found my midpoint, I'm going to measure down. It doesn't matter how far. Make a mark along the midpoint for you to see. This one. Now along this line I'm going to measure down 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Make a mark here. from that line, I'm going to measure a distance either side and make a mark there too. I'm just going to check that they are 5 centimetres down, both of them. That's right on the top of that one. This one, the same, right on the top. There we go. Now these markings are so as I know where to put my strap tabs. So let's bring those back. Here we are. So first thing I'm going to do is put my rectangle ring on, and I'm going to take some double-sided tape and I'm going to stick this together. Yeah. And I'm going to fold that together, matching up those edges. There we are. And take another piece of double-sided tape, put that on the back, decide which side you want to be the front and which you want to be the back. Right, now I need to line up the top edge here with the line that or the mark that I've made. Into place and stick that on. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch around the edges here, being really careful when I'm going past my rectangle rings here. And I'm going to stitch with a 3mm stitch length, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And when I've done that on this one, I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other outer. So we've got our lining fabric here and our zipper overlay. Now I've just put some double-sided tape on the back of my overlay. I found the midpoint, which is here. I've just folded it in half, found the midpoint. I've got the midpoint on my lining fabric and I've got the line that we marked earlier here, which I hope you can just see there. Take the double-sided tape, I've kept my tape away from the edges. Decide which way up I want it. That's okay. And lining up my midpoints and lining up the top edge with the line I marked earlier. Let's stick that down. I take this across to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch around the outer edge using a 3.5mm stitch length, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from this edge. It's only the outer edge that we're stitching, not the center one. Okay, so I'm going to take some scissors and we need to cut out this fabric from inside. So I'm going to fold this in half. I'll do it this way so as I can see what I'm doing. Okay, cut all the way through, turn that over, continue cutting. Being careful not to cut the overlay. We don't want to cut this overlay. We are only cutting the fabric from behind. So we need to be super careful. And cut over towards that corner. Again, be careful not to cut your stitches. We don't want to cut those either. Make sure that overlay is out of the way. Don't cut the overlay. There we go. So I've cut away at the back. You can see the overlay there. Put that to one side for a moment and let's bring in our zipper pocket pieces. So mine are non-directional. If you've got a directional fabric, you need to make sure that these are the tops this one over to one side, bring in my zipper. So we're going to line up the center of this zipper with the center of our lining. So let's fold that in half, find the midpoint, fold our zipper tape in half, find the midpoint, line up our top edges and clip in place. Now I'm making sure that my zipper pull is over to the left when it's closed and to the right when it's open, but it's entirely up to you which way around you want to put yours. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch across this top edge with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is about 3 millimeters. There we are, so that's stitched in place. Now we're going to attach the other one. So the easiest way to do this is if I turn this panel over, okay, so we're looking at the back of this, bring this one in and I'm going to fold my zip tape up. Okay, so I'm looking at the back where I've stitched it and I'm going to flip it up and I'm going to clip this side over here. Okay, making sure that I'm lining up edges of my 2 lining pieces and my zipper tape with the top edge of my second lining piece, and we'll clip that in place. Okay. Now we'll take this to the sewing machine and again I'm going to stitch across this top edge here with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is about 3 millimeters. Okay, so bringing back our lining panel and our zip pocket, I'm going to put some double-sided tape onto the zip. Now this is the thinnest double-sided tape that I have, so I'm being really careful where I'm placing it. Don't need lots, just enough to hold it in place. There we go. Peel that off. Place my pocket here, let's move this out of the way, and I'm going to place this on top. Okay, let's zip pull through. There we are. I'm going to flip this over, just check that we are sort of even. Are we in the middle? Yeah, not bad. Okay, let's flip it back over. Now I need to make sure that this is down and put the zipper teeth in the center. Now I need to make sure that my 2 lining fabrics are pointing up towards the top, okay? So make sure it is both of them and that there's nothing under this side. Okay, so put this back, 1, 2. Nothing on this side. I'm going to take this across to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch across this bottom edge here with a 3 millimeter stitch length, 3 millimeters or an 1/8 of an inch from the edge, starting and stopping here. So I'm only doing that one side, not the other 3, just this one bottom edge. There we are, so that's stitched across there. Now we're going to flip the pocket down. Okay, so everything is now down behind here, 1, 2. And now I'm going to stitch around the other 3 sides with my 3.5 millimeter stitch length, 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, making sure to pull my zipper pull out of the way as I'm sewing past. We don't want any accidents. there we are. So let's just check that works. There we go. Sewn together. I'm going to take this across. You'll notice that this is slightly longer here. So I'm going to trim that off. And then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to fold back the front. And I'm going to stitch down this side, fold back, across the bottom, fold back, back up the other side, and I'm going to sew those 3 sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is about 5 or 6 millimeters, back stitching really, really well at the beginning and the end, and coming right the way up here to the top of my zipper tape. There we are, so that's stitched down the side, across the bottom, back up the other side, back stitched well beginning and end, and now that's our pocket closed up. Bringing back my second lining fabric, I'm going to put these right sides together and I'm going to clip them across this bottom edge. And I'm going to take this across to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch down across this bottom edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is about 1.5 centimeters. Now I'm going to open this out and I'm going to butterfly open this seam at the back. You can use an iron if you want, press it flat. I think it will be okay. So keeping that seam butterflied open at the back, I'm going to top stitch down one side of the seam, across and back up the other side to the end with a 3.5 millimeter stitch length, 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from either side of that seam. Okay, so that's stitched, butterflied open at the back. So now this is really important with this facing. We're going to join the sides together, and what we need to do is make sure that the seams here at the start of our facing are matching up, because when you look into your bag, that's what you will see. So not only do we need to make sure that the sides match, we need to make sure that these 2 lining fabrics here at the top, the seams there also match. Clip that in place. We'll clip after the seam and we clip before the seam to make sure that that's not going to shift, and then we're going to finish clipping down this side and then the same on the other side. So that's clipped in place. Now I'm going to take this across to the sewing machine. I'm going to start at the top edge here with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, that's about 1 centimeter. I'm going to sew down the side past the cork facing that we've got here, and then I'm going to extend to 1/2 an inch from here all the way down to this bottom corner. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the same, 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. And then once I've got past this facing, I'm going to increase to a 1/2 inch, which is about 1.5 centimeters, all the way down to this bottom corner here. We're not sewing up these sides here or the bottom, only down these 2 sides. There we are, stitched down both sides. So starting at 1 centimeter, and as soon as I got to here, increased to a 1/2 inch. Okay, let's box the corners. So we'll start with one corner. We're going to butterfly open this seam. I'm going to pull at the sides. Let's pull this out. We need to make sure that the seams don't match just at the top here, but that they match all the way down. Okay, so I'm looking inside, matching them up, butterfly open this seam so it's the same, pulling, make sure I've got a nice angle there. Okay. clip that in place. So I'm going to take this across the sewing machine and stitch a line across a 1/2 inch or 1.5 centimetres from the edge, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the other corner. There we go, so that's stitched a line across there. I've done it on both of the bottom edges. I'm going to take my scissors, just trim down this seam allowance by about half. Get rid of some of that bulk. And there we are. That is our lining finished. So now we have to do the same thing with the outer. So here's my 2 outer fabrics. We're going to do the same as we did with the lining. We're going to put them right sides together. And we're going to start by clipping across this bottom edge, taking it across the sewing machine and sewing across that bottom edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Because this is the outer edge and because I'm working with cork, I'm actually going to do 2 rows of stitching. So my first row will be at a 1/2 inch or 1.5 centimetres. And then I'm going to sew slightly within the seam allowance by maybe 2 or 3 millimetres or 1/8 of an inch alongside it, just to give it a little bit extra strength and to stop those stitches from pulling. There we are, that's stitched. Now, because I'm using cork, it's a little bit difficult to butterfly this open. So I'm going to have to be quite firm with it over at the sewing machine. We're going to flip this over, butterfly this open, flip this over, and the same as we did with the lining, that down, we're going to top stitch down each side of this centre seam with a 3.5mm stitch length, 3 millimetres or 1/8 of an inch either side of this centre seam. So if you're using cork or vinyl, you'll need to manipulate this quite a lot over at the machine. Just take your time and sew slowly. There we are, so that's stitched both sides. That looks really nice. I love this lilac thread with this cork. So the same as we did with the lining, we're going to line up the sides, making sure the top edge is matched. Now the top edge is really important here. Make sure that top edge is matched, and then we're going to clip all the way down the side. So now I'm going to stitch down both sides with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting back stitching really well, beginning and end. Okay, so as you can see, I've done 2 rows of stitching. Now, I have made a mistake because I actually did a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the bottom, and it should have been 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So not 1.5 centimetres, it should have been 1 centimetre. So we might run into a problem here. Let's see what happens. So we need to do the same as we did with the lining. We're going to box these corners. Now, we're going to butterfly open this seam. Yeah, so mine doesn't quite match up properly because my seam allowances are different, but it's okay, it will be all right. So butterfly that open, make sure that the seams are matching, not just at the top, but all the way down. Okay, and we'll clip that in place. So 1 clip here for now, and then make sure that we clip down here to make sure that this doesn't shift. Let's just check that's still in place. I'm going to take this across the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch across with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, that's 1 centimetre, and I'm going to do 2 rows of stitching. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other corner. Here we are. We've got the lining there and the outer. Now, because I made the mistake and I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom of the outer, this is going to be a little bit fiddly for me. It should be so much easier for you. Your lining should be ever so slightly smaller than your outer, but never mind, doesn't matter. So we've got lining, wrong side out, outer, right side out. And we're going to stuff the lining inside. I'm just going to squish it down for now. It really doesn't matter, it's the top that I need to worry about. Squish all that in there. We need to match up these seams here. So it doesn't matter if you can do it however you want. You can nest them like this. I'm going to open mine, flatten them out and match up the seams that way and clip those in place. Obviously make sure whichever side you want to be the front and the back. Obviously I'm putting my zipper pocket at the back of my bag. So if you have a preference, whichever one is the front or the back, make sure that you get this lining round the right way. So turn that. Do the same here. Butterfly this open. Butterfly this one open. Nest them together and clip. Now I'm going to pull, and that should bring the outer and lining together. So I'll line up along the middle. Now, because I'm leaving this as a raw edge, I need to make sure that these are as even as I can get them and clip them in place. It means I might use quite a few clips, maybe more than I normally would, just to make sure that everything is staying lined up properly. There we are. So that's clipped all the way around. Now you might find that every now and again you get a little loop. With cork it tends to be a little stretchy, so I just have to be careful not to stretch it too much, or use the stretch in it to make sure that it fits properly. So now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch around the top edge using a 3.5mm stitch length, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I'm going to go slowly because I'm going to try and make sure to keep these as even as possible as I sew. There we are, so that's all stitched around the top. Now I've got a few little fuzzy bits here. So I'm just going to take my thread snips, just trim off any extra little bits of fluff. If your cork has shifted or your overlay shifted, you can just trim off a little here and there. Mine's not too bad. It did shift a little bit here. I have trimmed a little off of there. And then I'm going to take my lighter and I'm just going to burn around the edges of the top just to get rid of any extra little fluffy bits. There we are. So nearly there. It's looking great. I just need to attach the straps. So let's do that now. Here we go. So I've got my bag, my rivet press, 2 straps. I've got my tool for making the holes, got some clips, and I've got 8 rivets. So that's going to be 2 rivets for each handle. Okay, or each strap tab. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to measure where I want my straps to be. I like to eyeball this. You don't have to eyeball it. It's something that I do. So I want one here, which is going to be close to the end, and then a little further down, probably about 1 inch apart. Just to say that I did, I'm going to get my ruler and just double check that. And let's use a rivet press to press them into place. 1, 2. There we go. front and back. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Let's bend this round. Make sure you've got your strap around the right way. Okay, we don't want it like this. It needs to be looped around and then up and through. Okay, so I'm going to measure and make my marks and then do the same on the other side. There we are, so that's the straps added on. Now, the very last thing we have to do is we need to seal this top edge, because if we don't, cork is moisture resistant, so it's not a problem at all. However, the fabric backing isn't, so we do need to seal this top edge. If you don't have edge paint, it really doesn't matter. It's not important. What I tend to use is a fabric glue. It is washable and it dries clear. So it's quite a nice one to use. If you don't have this brand, it really doesn't matter. Just find yourself a really nice fabric glue that's washable, and that should work absolutely fine so long as it's a permanent glue. This one works well for me. And I've got my rolling tool. If you don't have one of these rolling tools, you can absolutely use a paintbrush or a toothpick or a cocktail stick or anything at all. Just something to add it on with. So let's open this. Oh, mine's a bit glued up. Now, you need to make sure that your edges are straight and that you've burnt them with your lighter. Okay, so once you've done that, all you need is just a tiny little dab of your fabric glue. Try not to get too much. It's incredibly messy. If you don't like getting messy, it will be. Okay, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll it along. And what we're trying to do is we're going to cover the whole of the top of it where this fabric is, sealing it together, so sticking it and sealing it together and covering the top. I'm going to do that all the way around. There we are. So I've concentrated really well where the seams join here. And I need to be careful, I've been very careful to not get it on the front of the cork, because if you get it on the front of the cork, it does tend to leave a patch there. If you do happen to get it on there, just wipe it off really, really quickly. If you wanted, you could use an edge paint. I've got this Angelus one, which I used on the strap ends and on the other cork edges. So once my glue dries, I'm going to go around with my leather paint and make that look pretty. But until then, there we are. One very pretty fundamental tote.